This was happening with you too. Yes, sir. We're gonna just have a party here.
The syrup organization welcomes you, okay, to our new free seminar. And this is a new concept that we're doing, which is called Alternatives, or How About Some Solutions Now? For short, solutions. Okay, we'll have more of these kinds of things dealing with solutions, and they will be free. Okay, because we think those kind of seminars are most practically essential, and we in no way want people to have any excuse for not coming to some of these things. A rule of ours is the whole is more significant than its parts. Now, it's the rule in communications, romantic relationships, philosophy, divine science of astrology, mathematics, wisdomic understanding, arriving at solutions in life, and getting to the facts, okay, etc. Now, we believe that the best way to better understand the UFO and alien phenomenon is through informing ourselves on different related topics of the phenomenon rather than just on one of them. For example, rather than just have a conference on abductions, all the way through, or rather than have a conference or have a concern about sightings all the way through, we deal with multiplicity of related issues. For example, alien life form types. We might deal with some of that in conference. Astronomy, astrology. In some meetings, we will pursue that in connection with some of these things. Alien abductions, of course, my lab, which is alien abductions along with military abductions, crash retrievals of UFOs, United States intelligence community, health concerns, Native American culture, which in spiritual realization, and we cannot avoid that situation because our government tells us that contacts, as far as their records tell, especially in contacts and abduction situations, have been more towards Native American people than other people. Now, I don't know whether that's a world phenomenon or just in the United States and North America, but it's significant, okay? And also sensitive military bases, Dogons of Mali, okay? So that's an interesting one too, okay? Okay, in this seminar, we seek some solutions and or vital information concerning these related topics, which be, in essence, which helps us to deal with our life challenges and fears in almost every respect. Before I introduce our first speaker, okay, I'm going to quickly offer you what we call life extensions, okay? And this is what we talk about. So this would be a little something to lead on the way. Something we call life extensions, and these are the things that we attribute that can be life extending. Rhythm, strong will, love, organization, clarity, wisdom, and truth. In rhythm, body, mind, soul. It puts all these things in coordination. Rhythmic beats and all these kind of situations has a phenomenal, interesting effect upon our system. We trying to understand rhythm in our lives in the daily day. I'm saying you can sleep it, you can put into some kind of emphasis on every aspect of your life. You'll find that it'll attribute to the good functioning of your organs and your glandular systems. Rhythm. If you do things off rhythm, then you conflict your organic system, your organ system. For example, your heart, for example, works good with rhythm. And all your circulatory system and respiratory system is rhythm. So you think about that, That's right, okay? So we say order in life's magnetic forces. Strong will, purpose and dynamics, psychic force. It has a force all of itself, is that you are steadfast and strong and persevering something, having no fear, taking all the fear away, and saying, hey, I will do it if it kills me. So you'd be surprised. You will do it before it kills you. Be surprised. Strong will. Strong will is a psychic thing, goes beyond all physical realities. And if you have in your mind that you will do it because it means so much to you, you will do it. In wisdomic astrology, we find that Scorpio people, usually with that kind of a configuration, have that strong sense of saying, I will do it or die. You know what I mean? And they do phenomenal things. They can do. See? So a lot of times it's all in your mind. It's all, that weakness is saying, because it is that energy that you say that I can't do it, and your inferior complex is half of what you can do. Okay? You're learning that. So strong will is very good. Love, of course, is essential feelings of order and of a unified whole. It's good for the health. It's also good for the organs too. And that's to love something, love somebody. Just like even loving pets is a beautiful thing. You find that it saves lives. It's good for people who are lonely, and it strengthens your physiological system, psychological system, and gives you a longer life. So you got to love somebody. Which means that we're supposed to be together, not separated. So the whole is more significant than its parts. Okay. So organization clarity. That's why you need to be organized and have some clarity. That's why the mind control try to disunify the organization and fuzz you up with clarity. So you find that the Aquarian age rap that's going on, a lot of that's been imposed by the CIA because it gives you a non-substantive life situation. And you're always in the midst. You're never on your feet, And so organization then in your every aspect of being and clarity in it helps to strengthen those beings too. Wisdom, of course, you know what to do and what not to do. And of course, that's been taken away from us. You ask why then was wisdom taken out of the Bible? Why did King James include the wisdom too? Okay? So that's not a part of your reality. You'll need to know. Okay? And truth. Truth is the light. Thus, frees the body and soul. And so, you search for truth, you be resilient to truth and all this kind of thing, and you go in the direction that you should be going. No matter what it perceives to be or what kind of disinformation comes out to saying, hey, you're being disinformed and all this kind of situation. It's despicable to realize that, this particular aspect of us in America and here is tormented and worstly dealt with because we get so much lies. We've been lied from the beginning and lied to the end. And every day of your life, especially for prime time, you're lied to. But it's our responsibility to understand the truth of the matter and seek truth and try to get those things going because it is the light and it is the way, In fact, once you go into those directions, those aspects of it, it will free your soul. It has that mystifying thing and you get to know what's real. It comes natural to you. Okay? So that's why we're being lied to. Okay? So that's syrup contribution to some of this today, and that's somewhat to help along. Now, without further ado, we want to introduce to you our first contestant. Are you ready, Mr.? This is a gigantic individual. He knows our organization because he was one of our main speakers, him and a gentleman he will tell you about, and the experience that they all pursued at our first conference that we ever did, which was 1994. And it was the dynamic conference. We had over 500 people that attended that. It was that conference that put us to where we are today, that gave us the inspiration to continue. And he knows. See? And this individual is a wonderful person. He's a writer, he's a co-writer, he's an author, he's a lecturer, he's a researcher, and very max the word. He's a media specialist and all, and he'll tell you more, of course. And he's here to talk to you. Nothing other than Peter Robbins. Okay.
Thanks, Pop.
Okay.
All right, Peter. Okay. Good afternoon. Is my voice coming through the mic? I can't tell from here. Okay. I'd like to thank Bob and you folks for having me here and to take a moment and give a round of applause to the volunteers who make these things possible because without them, we'd be home wondering what was on television right now. So. Okay, I'm here ostensibly to talk about two things, both of which could easily be the subject of an entire weekend seminar for one weekend a month for several years. I'm up for the challenge, but rather than try and absolutely rush through, let me put my primary attention on the first topic, and with whatever time we have left, introduce and get into the second topic. If when I leave off you're good and frustrated and say, I'd like to know more about that, have me back here and we will. The two topics are these. One is what is now regarded as the best known and best documented UFO incident in the history of the United Kingdom. It is the equivalent of, in terms of popular culture and regular awareness there, Roswell. What Roswell is here, although the events differ tremendously. Also, the event in question, which is referred to at different times as the Bentwaters-Woodbridge incident, referring to the two NATO bases that happened in the proximity of in southeastern England, or the Rendlesham Forest incident, happened 20 years ago, a week and a half ago. So we really are at the anniversary of this incident. Also, unlike Roswell, which is now 53 years ago, literally all of the principles for this incident are alive and quite well, although scattered around the United States and the UK and military bases around the world, which means that if we are able at some point in the next years to have a serious congressional investigation of this subject, and there have been two congressional investigations in the last 30 or 40 years, both of them very superficial and more a matter of symbolism than substance, this case could literally be the Rosetta Stone. You can subpoena witnesses on this. We approached the writing of the book Left at East Gate, which came out in 1997, sold here for a while, was a bestseller in the United Kingdom. The book itself, I have to tell you, when I signed on to work on it, I thought I was getting into a project that might last a year or so, and it turned out to take 9 years, and brought my co-author and I together and separately back to England 15 times at our own expense to do the research. But the simple fact is we became obsessed with it, my partner more than I, for the reason that it happened within a military context. These incidents happened in and around two of the most highly secured NATO facilities in all of the NATO establishment. They're located about 70 miles northeast of London in an area of England called Suffolk, East Anglia. They are now both decommissioned, can be visited. If you read Left at East Gate, you can literally use it as a tour book if you ever have an opportunity to visit England. But Larry Warren, my co-author on the book, at the time of the incidents, December 1980, was an Air Force security police officer who was stationed at RAF Bentwaters, an American base, well, a British base leased to the Americans since World War II, with two specialties. One was anti-terrorism, which was a genuine concern, even for incursions onto English soil in 1980, very much at the later height of the Cold War. The real reason that he and other security cops were there, though, was to guard and work around the largest repository of tactical nuclear weapons in the whole NATO establishment. One of the subtexts of this UFO story is that these two bases held something like 350,000 kilotons of American tactical nuclear devices. And I should stress here that these devices were on these bases in full violation of our treaty at that time with Great Britain. Some of you may remember that when Ronald Reagan became president, that treaty was altered, and starting in 1982, we did have a nuclear presence in the UK. It was the MX missiles, the ones that moved on tracks, that were brought in. What I'm talking about here are tactical nuclear devices made to be fired in the field, off the backs of Jeeps, even shoulder-mounted. Now, what does a tactical nuclear device mean? What's a kiloton mean? 1 kiloton nuclear explosion has a kill radius of 10 miles. If you were to draw a circle with a compass, everything within that 10 miles would be dead. Everything within the first mile would be glass. Stored under these two bases were 350,000 kilograms of nuclear devices. Also, if you go back to your newspapers, the last week of December 1980, the main international story in the news had to do with an upstart electrician working at a shipyard in Gdansk, Poland named Lech Walesa, an amazing guy who literally drew around him a core of people that created the democracy movement that ultimately was one of the kingpins that caused the beginning of the disintegration of the Soviet Union per se. What we were not aware of at the time is that last week in December, all of the NATO bases in the United Kingdom and in Europe were on a full red alert. Red is one step below black. Black means war. Why were they on this alert? Because unbeknownst to the public, the Soviets, with understandable concern about this spreading democracy movement in this satellite state, had massed over 100,000 troops on their border with Poland, and they were ready to roll. Bases like Bentwaters and its sister base Woodbridge, which had a lot of fighter aircraft, and the A-10s, which most people learned about during the Iraqi conflict, literally all their fighter aircraft was already at forward operating locations in West Germany, ready to move into World War III. Obviously, it didn't happen. Against this backdrop, a very tense political situation, a huge nuclear presence in violation of our treaties, in late December of 1980, over the course of 3 successive nights, the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th, a series of UFO incursions, sightings, and landings occurred within a very small proximity of several miles around and above these 2 NATO bases. Again, this is a story that took 9 years to write. It happened 20 years ago. The book sweeps across 20 years. The best I'm going to be able to do is give you a sense of the sweep of this story. It is not a story about little green men and flying saucers. It is much more a story about trying to conduct a serious investigation as a civilian about what a certain working group within our national security agency was willing to do to shut up the people that wanted to talk about this. It's a story about tension. It's a story about conflict and about conflict resolution. I will tell you right now, I cannot tell you exactly what that presence was. When I started, I thought, well, it's an extraterrestrial situation and we're just going to document it. I don't know if that's a fact now. I think that we're dealing with more than one kind of other intelligence. I am kind of old school in terms of my research. I've been in the field more than 20 years. I've done a lot of field work. And again, this case is the one that I really bit down on and wouldn't let go of the stick. I had no idea that it was going to take 10 years from the time we shook hands to get the book published. I'm very proud of the work that we did. I know for a fact that many members of Parliament, people within the Ministry of Defense, a lot of English citizens, as well as a handful of Americans have read this story, and it has to some degree changed perception on the seriousness of the subject in the United Kingdom. The mark of that is that 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, when my co-author Larry Warren held a vigil in the Rendlesham Forest where this happened, 100 people joined him. And it made the newspapers all over the United Kingdom. It's a serious story and one that we still don't have all the answers to. If anybody could tell me and prove it that what we're dealing with is some kind of super high-tech but very terrestrial kind of testing of our psychology to see how we would respond to something like this with post-Aurora type aircraft and holograms and mind control, I wouldn't lose a moment's sleep. I didn't enter this with an agenda, and I didn't leave it with an agenda. I do think that what caused the incidents that we'll be describing and going over here this evening were definitely another intelligence. Whether or not they were from another planet, another dimension, another time, another universe, I don't know, and I wouldn't presume to tell you that I do know, which I know some folks find frustrating because I've worked the case for 9 years, and if I don't know, who does? Well, none of us really do right now. And sometimes solutions is about making your peace with what you don't know. Otherwise, you just damage yourself. What we're going to do now is take a few minutes and we're going to look at a film clip. There's been quite a number of things over the years on American and British television, European television, Japanese television about the Bentwaters incident. Most of them have been pure tripe and very corny. What we're going to see is 7 minutes from a British documentary made by the preeminent British documentary house Central Television in London, which Larry and I participated in. It's part of a larger UFO documentary that some of you may have seen because ITV in England sold the documentary to the Learning Channel, and they've screened it over the years about 50 times or so. So if this looks vaguely familiar to you, that's why. And with any luck at all, everything should work just fine as I turn off the light. Okay, Bob, would you bring up one light? Because we're going to go right to the slides.
Okay.
On that tape, I should stress two things before we move on. Number one, Admiral Lord Peter Hill Norton, who you saw at the end there, is a retired Chief of Staff of the Ministry of Defense. That makes him the full equal of Colin Powell. He was, in his time, the highest-ranking uniformed military presence in the United Kingdom, as well as Admiral of the Fleet, head of the Navy. The reason that he has gone public with his opinions on this, where another person in his position would never think of it, is that upon retirement, he found out through people in the research community, through colleagues within the British Ministry of Defense, and through a core of people who supplied him Freedom of Information Act actions, which they don't have there, which we do have here, that not only was this true, not only had his government and our government taken this seriously for decades, but, and here is the catch, he was out of the information loop as Chief of Staff of the Ministry of Defense. Now, what does that say about how tightly controlled this information is? Okay, we're going to move right into the slides right now. And just give us a moment to focus, and then we'll get the light again. Okay.
Just let me know.
Okay, actually, if you can that pull down any lower, or is that maximum? Okay, good. Okay, lights, please. Not. Yeah. Okay, then you know what? Let me just. Oh, perfect. Okay, we got it here. Well, that's a little too high. That's not so bad, though. Okay. Lights. Okay, my colleague Larry Warren, this is the summer of 1980 in basic training in Texas. And I've had people say to me, oh, he wasn't even in the Air Force, and we have got a lot of information to prove they are wrong. Okay, this gives you an idea of where in the United Kingdom this happened. I should say here, when we did this talk in Gulf Breeze some years ago, a guy came up to Larry afterwards, very respectful, said, Larry? Larry said, yeah. And he said, now, on that map that you showed us, Larry said, yeah. He said, that blue dot, yeah. Said, the flying saucer was that big? I said, no. Wasn't. Okay, once again, closing in a little bit. Here's the twin base complex over here, Bentwaters and Woodbridge, right on the coast, only about 6 miles from. I'm going to move that. Yeah, right. This is too high. Can you all see?
Okay?
No, but some people in the back can't see with that low?
Is that okay?
No, it doesn't. It's unfortunately static, so
Okay.
yeah, that should be fine.
Okay.
Okay, hold it. Okay?
Is that better?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and closing right in, the green indicates the so-called Rendlesham Forest. RAF Bentwaters is here. Main runway. RAF Woodbridge, its sister base, is here. Largest runway in all of Europe. The incident themselves, over the 2 nights preceding the 3rd night, happened in and around the weapons storage area, that's the nuclear weapons storage area on Bentwaters and over Woodbridge. What they saw the first 2 nights was nothing less than disc-shaped lights coming in over a nuclear weapons storage area. Now let's think for a minute, what would happen if even a small plane flew in by accident over a nuclear weapons storage area, they would shoot first and ask questions later. Nothing touched these things. Over the next night or two, they touched down in the woods. We know this because they not only left impressions in the ground, circular impressions, 3 of them, triangulated landing apparatus, but they're able to do pressure tests on the soil and establish that whatever sat there weighed several tons. Or if this was faked, somebody dragged something in that weighed several tons. However, you already heard Colonel Halt, while one of these things was happening, it was very real for him and his men. Also, as these things came in, they tore out forest canopy cover. They bumped up against trees. Where this happened, they left 10 times plus the background count of beta and gamma radiation. We know this for a fact, and it has been confirmed through the Ministry of Defense. Again, both bases are decommissioned right now. Bentwaters is undergoing a certain amount of civilian work. Woodbridge still has a small military presence, air-sea rescue, but these are a few shots of the area of the base. This was the old main entrance. Unfortunately, now you see a lot of concrete blocking around entrances and exits to military bases, concern about truck bombs. That's one of the few ways they can stop them. This would have been the sign that would have greeted you had you visited Bentwaters in 1988, 81st Tactical Fighter Wing. But had you been stationed there in 1980, this is the sign that would have greeted you right on the runway. This modest-looking building was the headquarters of the 81st Tactical Police Squadron, an award-winning squadron that was directly involved in these incidents. Had I tried to take this photograph, or even a year or two before I took this, I would probably still be somewhere in a British dungeon. This is a very highly classified structure, as are the ones that follow. Considering that this base allegedly had no nuclear weapons on it, this is part of the nuclear weapons storage facility. These structures are made of layer after layer of earth, concrete, steel, and then when you get down into them, they're on big hydraulics where the floors drop into an underground area where this material was stored. Rather chilling looking structures. They're there now and abandoned. Expect they'll make them into condominiums in the next few years. Right. Larry was a pack rat with his paperwork, thank goodness, and I will say it here, and we discuss it in detail in the book. After the incident, after he was a witness, after they had done a certain amount of, how can I say this politely, messing around with the brains of some of the men who had been involved through drugs, through hypnosis, through other kinds of programming, staging, Larry began to become obsessed with the story, and at that point was taken off of his police duties and put on clerical work. Was actually caught at one point going through files that were classified, was identified himself very early on as a troublemaker and a potential threat to keeping this secret, and realized that he might have put himself in harm's way, and decided that because the Air Force had broken their training agreement with him, and it's not like, say, when my dad joined the service, you joined, you stayed in, you left when your term was up. Modern service enlisting is about you make an agreement with your service branch, you teach me to be an electrical engineer, and I'll stay in the Air Force for 4 years or whatever. They broke their agreement with Larry, and he was literally able, legally, to sue for separation based on violation of contract. And I should stress that when he left the Air Force in May of 1981, he left with a fully honorable discharge. In the course of walking through papers, it was suggested to him by another man who was involved, he just had a bad feeling about their paperwork, and if you ever want to see any of your paperwork again, steal it. And literally, as he was walking some of his files from one point to another, he opened his shirt and stuck them in there. It's a good thing that he did for our purposes, because by September 1981, every shred of Air Force paperwork on my colleague, my friend, my co-author, was taken into possession of the National Security Agency on national security grounds. This involves even the most innocuous paperwork. We have never seen it. It is at Fort Meade, Maryland, and that is another thing that might make you ask a question or two. This is one of the documents that he held on to. It is an in-processing inspection sheet which notes that he has been assigned to D Flight. And over here, Airman First Class Warren will be posted to duty, roster D Flight 10 December 1980, a full 2 weeks before the incidents. And just a close-up. And these are important because, as you'll see when you read the book, there have been so much twisting of facts and so many unsubstantiated allegations about the involvement of the witnesses, especially this key witness, that we feel obligated to back it up with as much paperwork as we have. The night of the first incident, this appeared in the Venerable Times of London, and it notes that bright lights were seen breaking up over the area. Well, interestingly, there was a meteorite shower that night that could be observed from that area if you were standing in exactly the right spot for 4 seconds. This went on and on and on, and not to be confused with the meteor explanation. What is a little insulting and par for the course about this is that the Times basically brushes the whole thing off by noting on the last paragraph, the film Airport 1975 was shown on television on Thursday night, raising public awareness to the possibility of aircraft in trouble, i.e., people started hallucinating and saying silly things like they saw UFOs. Very insulting, very cavalier, doesn't wash. This was taken on the morning of the third incident, the big one, the appearance of a craft. We have an interesting detail here. Larry was trying out a new Instamatic camera at the main gate, and you'll notice here there is a sign, and it says alert condition. Indeed, this base was on high alert. Again, not because of UFOs, because of the situation in Poland, but just to set the tone for that night. Right. On this particular night, every single post around this base was manned. On normal nights, where they were not on a red alert, some of them would be manned. There was genuine concern about Russian paratroopers coming into England. They were that concerned about this situation in Poland. And Larry was assigned to what is likely the most remote perimeter post 18, which is right there. It's the remains of an old pillbox, which is a small fortification you see all along the east coast of England, which were built in the early 40s, basically to guard against Nazi invasion right along the coast. Thank God they were never used. Over the course of his posting, which began around midnight, he's got an M16, he's got a Motorola portable radio, and he starts hearing guys several miles further up the line talking about strange lights in the sky. He cranes his neck, he can't see anything, but he hears the earnestness in their voices. And within a matter of about 15 minutes, he is called by commanding officer of D Flight and told that he should close down his post, that a vehicle will be along to pick him up for another assignment. He confirms that he will do that. Within 15 minutes, this particular truck comes by, driven by a Captain Bruce England with a Sergeant Adrian Bastinza, who continues to be a presence in this story, and they head for the motor pool. It's already after midnight. They're joined by many vehicles. Each vehicle attaches a light-all. A light-all is essentially a military equivalent of the big Hollywood Klieg lights they use at premieres, but they're operated by gas generators. They fill up the tanks completely and head out into the night. Interestingly, at this point, when they go through the main gate, the base technically undergoes a second treaty violation with the United States, well, with Great Britain. The first one, of course, being the nuclear presence. The second being that all of a sudden there are American troops being deployed in the area at night with loaded weapons. They head out of the base area and they head into the night. Nobody knows where they're going or the reason for it. They pass this road about 5 miles later. It is the right turn that you would take to go into the entrance of the sister base RAF Woodbridge. And if you were to go about 3/4 of a mile down this road, you would see the Woodbridge Guardhouse, which was the first place that activity was observed from 2 nights earlier. Well, they pass that road and they make their left onto this logging road into a public area of forestry land, which is used for logging. Hence the left at Eastgate, or the left after Eastgate for the title of the book. The trucks and vehicles drive about half a mile down. There's a circular area, which is a clearing. The trucks and vehicles stop. The men get out. Another pickup truck pulls up. It's got racks welded on the back. It's an armorer's truck, and they disarm the men. I'm sure many of you, like me, are fans of the wonderful science fiction classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And remember that fabulous scene when poor Klaatu gets out of the saucer, goes to show them this fabulous pen that the president can use to communicate, and one soldier with an itchy finger fires off a shot. It is my thought that not only were these men disarmed with that thought in mind, but for reasons we go into in some detail in the book, the higher-ups had some idea of what they were sending these men into. The men were then broken up into 4-man groups, 1 Motorola radio per man, and told to head out in that direction and, quote unquote, investigate a disturbance. This is where things got very much into the twilight zone. I've had other men confirm this aspect, but as they walked into this area, the Motorola radios started to fritz out, handheld flashlights weren't working well, and not a single light all of which had just been gassed up and checked, worked in that field that night. More, there was a static electricity charge in the air as they got closer to the site, which you saw in that video clip, which is a farmer's field called Capel Green. The static electricity charge was so powerful, and let's remember here we're dealing with a lot of healthy young guys, 19, 20 years old. They're not wearing helmets, they're wearing berets. That's a security cop thing. Point is, they all have what some of us used to have, a nice big full head of healthy hair. And as one guy described it to me, he said, "Do you remember Jiffy Pop?" That old popping way where it'd blow up. The static electricity charge was so powerful, it pushed the berets off the heads of a lot of these guys. Their hair went up that straight. As Larry headed into the area, he saw at one point a sergeant had absolutely broken down and was sobbing, leaning against, with his back to a tree stump, which is still there, and a non-commissioned officer was trying to calm him down. Truly, this was a very hairy situation. If you, again, go down that road, this is what you come to right before the farmer's field. You can just make out the edge of the field. They moved into the forest and came out about 50 yards to the left. Now, I want you to keep this picture in mind because you'll be seeing it again later. The reason is what looks like an illusion, namely this area is darker, is not an illusion. The soil in that roughly elliptical area is darker. This picture was taken February 1988. This is the site of an incident from December of 1980. 8 years, 3 months later. To cut to the chase, what you are seeing here is a legitimate trace mark of an incident that occurred 8 years and 3 months earlier. Now, my first reaction when we came over that hill, and Larry's arm shot out like a reflex, and I have all this on tape, and he said, "It sat right there." And then he was quiet for a minute, and he said, "But of course, that's a coincidence that that area is discolored." And my first thought was not, "Oh my God, that's the spot where UFO sat and that's why it's discolored." I don't work like that. My first thought was, it's a play of light. It's a plowed field, so it's hitting differently. Maybe a farmer dumped some nitrate fertilizer there a year ago and didn't spread it out. Maybe lightning hit. Always go for the conventional explanations before you go for the extraordinary. Don't go the other way if you research things. You'll bollocks your own case. But over the course of the afternoon, we finally took samples, test samples from, say, here, and another one from, say, here, and then one from the central area. I get them back to our bed and breakfast where we're staying, where we have always stayed, folks who have become like family, and do a very simple test. First, they look different. Second, when you squish one up, it's good English farm soil. You know, we all know that feeling of reaching down, good loamy soil, feels moist, looks good, dark. The other soil looked like it had been fried. It had no moisture in it. It was very clumpy or like dust. And I took an exact equal amount of each one, put it in an equal-sized jar lid, added like a tablespoon or two of water and stirred them both up. And without conducting further tests, which were scientifically conducted later, and we'll go over those later, I was able to establish with no uncertain terms that one became mud very quickly. The other did no such thing. It clumped to the bottom or it floated on the top, and no matter how I would work it with that spoon, it never became mud. That soil was affected by what happened there that night. This farmhouse, by the way, during the incident, the windows on the second floor were illuminated. That farmer was home. I cannot tell you how many researchers, besides myself, Jenny Randalls, Timothy Good, have tried to find out what happened to the people that lived there that night. They moved out shortly after. No one has ever been able to trace their whereabouts. I'm not suggesting foul play. I am suggesting, though, almost a witness protection relocation level where even good private investigators have not been able to trace down these folks. This is the oak tree that was used basically as a navigation point. It's the only one on the field, and you saw it also in the video. They used it in that transition shot from night to day. Now, bearing in mind that none of the light-alls worked and that it was a moonless night, this thing was lit up. How so? The object itself. First, I should say, when it appeared, you know, that red light came down over the circular mist, which they had been ordered to surround in the field. And then, without a sound, it exploded, I don't know how else to say it, with such magnesium brightness that it burned the retinas of my co-author's eyes, and we have the Air Force medical documentation to back it up, and many of the eyes of many of the other men as well. But the craft continued to glow to such a degree that it illuminated the area. This was a drawing Larry did for me in November 1987, several months before we even went to England, of his idea of what this might have looked like had it been seen from above. As you can see, even from this very cursory drawing, we're not talking about a conventional flying saucer. It has its own very distinct shape. These lines would have indicated individuals standing around it, close, 20, 25 feet, very close. Over here was one of the cameramen. The actual big oak tree was just out of sight here. This would have been the farmhouse. And at a certain point, as they're standing there looking at this thing, they see a glow from the other side, and it starts to move slowly. And it moves, and I should also say, this is where Larry stood, and Sergeant Adrian Bastinza right next to him. The glow moved around and stopped there. And then the glow receded, and they could make out three distinct shapes within the glow. And I think we all know that feeling of denial in a shock situation. Automobile accident, tragic death, very sudden of somebody. That sense of denial where nothing is real for a moment. And Larry's first reaction, and he writes about it very eloquently in the book, was, "Oh my God, what are kids doing out here? This is a military situation." They weren't kids. They were three beings. They were not your archetypal grays, but they were about 3.5 feet tall. Torsos, arms, legs, cranium, large head, huge black sweeping eyes, no discernible mouth or nose. And just to make it a little wilder, they seemed each one to be in a garment, tight-fitting, and floating a full foot off the ground. Not fun. Again, the men held their positions. At this point, a senior officer, and it is in some dispute which officer it was, unarmed also, steps through the cordon of men from the direction of the woods and basically comes within 10 feet of these beings and faces off with them. It's been suggested there was communication. Well, there was in the sense that probably 80% of all human communication is nonverbal. It can be look or body language or just a sound. If in that sense, maybe there was communication, but I've heard the story exaggerated insanely. We gave them chocolate bars, we shook hands with them, didn't happen. But there was a face-off between a human being and these three little beings. At a certain point, there was a loud sound. All I've spoken to agree that it was a tree falling in the forest. It happens. And when it happened, these three beings literally shot back and receded with their backs directly to the craft and glowed very brightly. This is a moment where had somebody been armed, shots probably would have been fired. Within a matter of a few minutes, it was obvious that there wasn't anything to it. The glow receded, the beings came forward, and the standoff held. Starting about 2 a.m. or so, the master sergeant on location, Sergeant Ball, started to go round the circle and tap out every third guy with the understanding that they head back to the staging area where the vehicles were about half a mile away. Larry was in the second to last group to be tapped out. And as he walked away, where the forest meets the field, he stopped, turned around, fixed this picture in his mind, and went back to the trucks. Just a close-up. Within minutes of the incident, his eyes started to itch and burn and water, and they were no better the next morning. He did not sleep that night, as I'm sure many of the men involved also did not sleep that night. And he reported that he had an eye problem. He was given an appointment to the base medical facility. The appointment was fulfilled, as you can see here, on the 2nd of February. And the doctor in question writes under that clinic remark, Opti/ret burn EXP, optical retinal burn exposure. Had his retinas been burned, you can bet it would have been caught on the Air Force physical going into the Air Force. This happened then and there. And we've often made jokes about, gee, we should get these other guys together and do a class action lawsuit. You know, you look at the problems that those poor Agent Orange survivors are having, or the Gulf War guys with the depleted uranium. I don't think they'd have a very good chance of winning a suit about hurting their eyes in a UFO incident, but it is exactly what happened. Now, the next morning, Larry did something in full violation of what had been told to them, namely, don't talk to each other, don't talk to anyone else, forget this ever happened. Larry is very close to his mom. She lives in upstate New York. The next morning, with a friend of his, Steve LaPlume, who has backed this up, he goes to a public payphone on the base, calls his mom. Mom, you're never going to believe what happened. We saw a UFO last night, yammer, 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 and the next thing he knows, he's talking to dead air. Well, he decides, well, it's obvious he's been cut off mid-conversation here. His mom also had a witness, by the way, who confirmed her end of the conversation, as well as his mother. And she is one tough gal and quite an amazing person, I must say, in her own right. Well, Larry calls back on the phone and gets the British operator on and tries to pull a little rank and say, I was just cut off on a call to the United States. And she said, sir, are you calling from a base phone? He says, yes. She said, oh, sir, if you were cut off, it was from within the base. And he turns to his friend Steve and says in so many words, I'm screwed. And goes back to his dormitory facility and waits. And within half an hour or so, a captain appears and says, come with me. And he's taken to the base law enforcement office, where he is sat down. And the officer says words to the effect of, we know that you guys are under a lot of stress from what happened last night, but you were told not to talk about this. And he looks the guy in the eye and lies his heart out and says, I did not talk about this. He says, yes, you did. You made a call to the States. He says, no, I didn't. The officer rolls open the bottom drawer of his desk. There's a big reel-to-reel tape recorder there. He pushes the button, and Larry hears the phone call that he never made. The guy says, look, I appreciate the situation here. We know that this was not an easy incident. I don't want to, hurt you or your career, but we either have to fine you a certain amount of money, symbolic couple of $100, which we'll take out of your salary in increments, or you got to give up one of your stripes. And Larry figured it would take him years to get back that stripe, so he took the fee, which when he left the service, I should say, He owed $94 and some odd cents, and several years later got a letter from the Air Force saying, "You owe us $94 and some odd cents." And he wrote him back and said, "No problem. Just remind me what that was for, and I'll be glad to send you a check." Never heard from him again. But anyway, he calls his mom. And that day, his mom sits down and writes him a letter and mails it shortly after. And this is from that letter. "Well, enough of that. You certainly explained your situation with the UFO. And as you know, Larry, what was seen by you and by others and yourself was just that, a UFO. It must have been quite, etc." Now, Colonel Halt's memo is dated 2 weeks after the incident. I think about the 13th or so of January 1981. His mom's letter is dated January 22nd. Right in that time frame, that postmark is less than 3 weeks after the incident. This is the so-called Halt Memorandum, the Halt document. It is, to the best of my research and knowledge, a compression. It has a little bit of spin on it. It's a little bit of disinformation. Disinformation is not a lie. It is a very skillful mix of truth and fiction to produce a certain result. Nonetheless, it still reads like bad science fiction. And let us remember that this document was written by none other than the deputy base commander of this base, who retired some years later as a full colonel and is the highest ranking officer to admit to being involved in this incident. There are others. This is also reproduced and left at Eastgate. Now, within weeks of the incident, men who had been involved were scattered to the four corners of the earth. Within about a month of the incident, Larry and Adrian Bustinza, who you see in this photo, which is a snapshot Larry took, were in Egypt for a military exercise called Operation Bright Star, which became an annual military exercise, which I believe has just had its 19th incarnation, so to say. But that is at the in the Valley of the Kings in the spring of 1981. Adrian Bustinza, Master Sergeant, USAF. That is Larry Warren. That spring also, some people have said, well, he wasn't in the Air Force, he wasn't involved, he didn't know the principal players. At this point, this photograph was taken at the change of command ceremony. The former base wing commander, Gordon Williams, who enters into this story with some prominence, was going back to the States, and there was a big ceremony to mark that. Larry was his security, part of his security detail, and his driver that day. That is formal attire for Air Force security cops at the time. That is his badge itself. And you don't get those in Cracker Jack boxes. Now, so many times in UFO studies, we sort of zoom by things, or we look at superficial aspects of what's called proof or evidence. Sometimes it's important to dig deeper because you really see the depth to which things spin in a different way on this. This is a form, it's actually a rough form, as you can see, request for separation. Now, it is stamped, signed, ultimately it was signed by Gordon Williams, wing commander. And the reason for separation from the Air Force is clearly laid out. That non-fulfillment of guaranteed training enlistee program agreement. The Air Force didn't meet the agreement. Larry was entitled to an honorable discharge. That's why he left the Air Force. Remember that. Close up. This is called an honorable discharge. And that little cover-up in the middle there is not some super secret detail. It's Larry's Social Security number, and for some reason he doesn't want me to tell you all what it is. Go figure. Not very trusting. As you can see, it's dated May 1981, 18th. Okay, Larry returns to upstate New York, Glens Falls, New York, to be specific. As in Bucks County at the time, the economy sucked. It was a terrible economy to go back to, and he decided to begin a new career as a dishwasher, which was the only job that he could get. and very shortly was reconsidering his decision. It was not the Air Force that he disliked. It was this episode, what happened to him, what happened to other men, and I haven't even mentioned what is for me more shattering than the incident itself, which I do need to touch on right now, namely 24 hours later, less than 24 hours later, Larry, Adrian, other men involved the night before were called on their secured base phones and told to be outside of their dormitory areas at 8 o'clock. They would be met by civilians who had need to question them further. Larry walked out that night. A late model American black sedan pulls up. Two guys in black suits get out. Yes, no joke. And at that point, his conscious memory goes a little fuzzy. What he remembered consciously was in the course of an exchange with these guys going unconscious, being thrown into the back of the car, then being thrown into a small room where the pressure changed very dramatically. His ears popped, like in an elevator going very, very, very far down. And then he was missing for a day and a half. His friends were told he was on an emergency leave. He was somewhere under that base with other men being subjected to what I can only describe as a Disneyland on LSD type scenario, where they were being programmed with other imagery, so that if any of them were ever reckless enough to go forward and talk about this in a public forum or even to someone else, the forces that be hoped that the true story would mix with the planted story and he'd sound like a lunatic. With many men, I'm sure this worked, but this kind of programming is like popcorn. People go off at different rates. Some kernels don't pop at all, as we know. And his memory was clear but confused. Now, some years later, as you learn in the book, this event was still plaguing him, and I mean plaguing him, to such a degree that he felt he would harm himself or someone else if he did not get to the bottom of it. If you've met Larry, if you know who he is, if you've heard him speak, the presence he projects is very real. He is a very macho, in-your-face guy. He doesn't back down. He's got more courage than common sense, and I love him for it, but it has gotten him in a hell of a lot of trouble over the years with this incident. The point being that he would not back down from his account of this story, but he was very troubled by it. And ultimately, he asked Bud Hopkins, who many of you know or know of as not just a preeminent researcher, but one of the great humanists in this field, a kind and decent person who is a crack investigator, of course, specializing in the abduction phenomena. And I've sat in on many hypnotic regressions over the years as Bud's assistant for more than 10 years, but I've never seen one quite like this. There was my friend. He was 19 years old again, and he was terrified. And in fact, when he walked out of his dorm, there were two guys in black suits. One of them said, "Are you Warren?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Identify yourself." Classic Larry. He said, "You identify yourself." The guy got kind of huffy, and then he sees out of his peripheral vision the other guy coming around the other side raising what looks like an aerosol can, which was an aerosol can. But it was not Pledge or Windex in it. It was some thing that put him in a terrible altered state, dropped him to the ground. The two guys throw him into the backseat of the car like potatoes, then take him to a secured building on base where he is thrown into an elevator and down it goes. You get all the details in the book. But point being, by the autumn of 1981, Larry was ready to go back into the Air Force. And there was no reason he shouldn't be able to. He had a fully honorable discharge. He goes and gets in touch with his enlistment sergeant, who was still working out of his office in Albany, New York. Guy says it shouldn't be any problem. Punches in his name on the computer. What comes up is no information, nothing else follows, do not process. He says, "What did you do in the Air Force that would cause this to happen?" He said, "I'd tell you, but you'd think I'm crazy." The enlistment sergeant tries very hard to get to the bottom of it, is unable to. Within 6 weeks is dead in an unexplained automobile accident. In the meantime, Larry enrolls our then and still congressman from that area, Jerry Solomon, who should be ashamed of himself because he has been in charge of I believe, the Veterans Affairs Committee for the last few years and totally skirted the issue of what he knew about this case. And Solomon gets in touch with the Air Force. This letter ultimately is sent to Solomon, which he forwards to Larry. The gist of it is, reply to your letter on behalf of Lawrence P. Warren concerning his interest in enlisting in the Air Force. Problem number one, he had no interest in enlisting in the Air Force. And if you're in the service, there's a big distinction between enlisting and re-enlisting. Number two, authorities in the office of the Surgeon General of the Air Force advised that Mr. Warren was permanently disqualified by the USAF Air Training Command on September 17th. Wait a minute. September 17th, he left the Air Force in May. He had no dealings with them after that, except for trying to re-enlist. So what is that about? We don't know. But what the office of the Surgeon General had determined was that by reason of congenital, partial, ankylosis, radiolinear, joint, proximal, bilateral, what that means is, first congenital, from birth, that he cannot fully extend his right arm. Well, he was able to fully extend it very well when he had his Air Force physical. He was able to fully extend it very well when he dropped this into the wastebasket and thank God retrieved it. But it also means bilateral, that he can't extend both arms except that it's just one arm. Excuse my bluntness, but this is complete and total bullshit. And why they sent it to him, I guess, was, maybe to try to wear him out or frustrate him. Thank goodness that we kept it, because it does point out some of the silly extremes they will go to that they figure are going to put people off the case. And with most sane people, it would have. With Larry, it did not. This is a lie. We know why he left the service. Now, because Larry went forward to, at that time, the organization that was CAUSE, that's now headed by Peter Gersten, was a somewhat different organization. And their lawyer instituted a Freedom of Information Act action to secure information on the Bentwaters incident. The information they had was from Larry. He gave them names, times, locations, places, and it resulted in the release of the HALT document. After that, this thing hit the British news big, and it broke in the biggest tabloid in the United Kingdom in the first Sunday in October of 1983. After that, this was a known commodity in the United Kingdom, much as Roswell was over some years of, being fed into the major media rather than the specialist UFO-related media. And this, of course, is the headline of that paper on that day. I was able to clock over 100 articles that came out of British publications over just the next 3 months alone, and many dozens that have followed since. In the summer of 1987, MUFON held a 40th anniversary UFO conference. Again, 1947 was the year that pretty much kicked this off. And it was held at Washington University. Yes, it was held at Washington University in Washington, D.C. And I heard Larry speak there. He heard me speak there. I knew that authentic military witnesses who were willing to speak were about as rare as hen's teeth, and most of them did not pan out at all. His talk left a mark on me, and we ran into each other at the hall the next day and chatted each other up, both with very different motivations. I was looking to get an interview, which he told me he'd be glad to grant me, and he was living in Connecticut at the time, was going to come in, see me the next weekend. What he wanted that I was not aware of was somebody to write this book with him. My first thought was, maybe he should choose an author, like somebody who's written a book. But he felt it was me, and I signed on. I thought I was in for a year or two. It was 9 years until we finished the book, and another year till we got it published. We were back to England 15 times in that time, separately and together. This is the house we stay at. It's only about 1.25 miles from the main gate at Bentwaters, about 5.5 miles from the site of the incident in Capel Green, the farmer's field, and the people that run this place have become like family to us. This photograph was taken right after that one I showed you earlier in the field. At the time, I had a couple of rolls of black and white. I didn't think we'd ever be back there. And we walked out to ground zero. There's the farmhouse again. I gave him one of my tape recorders and I said, "Can you relive this right now?" And he did, and it was a very poignant poignant account. I should also say that this account was very recently subjected to voice stress analysis, which is kind of the verbal equivalent of lie detection. It measures stress in the human voice and ascribes a reason for the stress. It came up absolutely flatlined. There was no wavering at all in the minds of the technicians that did the tests, who I should also say have never looked into a UFO situation in their life. They mostly work with police cases. So, back we go to this discoloration. Again, February 1988. I come back there on my own a little over 2 years later in June of 1990, walk back out to the field. Obviously, it's summer. And on that same spot, and again, go back. There it is. Here's the stand of trees, but from a slightly different angle. Here's the stand of trees straight on, and right on that spot, what do we see? A green ellipse. The rest of the field is hay, except for those red coloring back there, which is wild poppies. Very beautiful. Now, what could cause such a thing? At this point, I began to take the first of several trips back of soil samples. Pounds of soil, which were packed into containers supplied to me by the Wareham Springborn Environmental Laboratory in Wareham, Massachusetts, where this soil was professionally analyzed. What we learned was this. Number one, that in germination tests, where they take control samples, soil taken from here or from here, and then compare it to seeds germinated in the affected soil, that the seeds in the affected soil grew much slower and mutated. Hence, while all the grass in the field is already becoming hay, this stuff is still coming up slowly. Show it to you from another angle. I want you to see that this is anomalous in this field. Composite with yours truly. It is real. We also found out that the affected area had 4 times plus the amount of small metal particles of the surrounding area. Now, one would expect X amount of iron ore and whatever else in the field. When I questioned our analyst about this, he said there's only one thing that suggests itself to me, that something sat there, and visualize this in your minds, exerted such a powerful electromagnetic presence that it literally drew those metallic little pieces of soil into that area. Think about the power that it would take to pull the soil to a times of more than 4. Most dramatic is, again, we're 5 or 6 miles from the coast here. We're right on the English Channel. One would expect a certain amount of sand in the soil, and indeed there is. There's the same amount of sand in the affected and the control samples, but the sand in the affected sample is, as it was described very dispassionate to me by our soil analyst, in an interim form of glass. It melted. They were not even able to reproduce this in the laboratory using industrial microwave technology, which is very different than our home microwaves. Something happened. And again, I'm the first to say if this was a real paranormal event, which was then fed into by mischievous folks within our national security agency, with holograms, with whatever, we are still talking about an event real enough to melt sand and to burn the retinas of your eyes. This is not a hallucination or a hologram. Now, this is sort of the segue, and I see I've got about 25 minutes left, so I will do my best to introduce Dr. Reich's work with this segue. We stumbled into a situation when we went back in February 1988, which gave this story a dimension I would really rather it didn't have, and would still rather it didn't have. Number one, because the event itself is very unnerving and suggests some extreme malicious mischief, if you will, on the part of the United States Air Force. More, though, it brings us to a dovetailing with the work of probably the most misunderstood, maligned, and distorted scientific body of knowledge to emerge out of the work of one individual during the 20th century. And I refer to the scientific work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who many of you may have heard of, and probably very few have even had a chance to get your hands on a book of his. I believe that no less than 15 of his books have been published in English. Maybe one is in print now, although I'll be glad to give you some sources where you can get other books. I wasn't kidding when I said we could go on for a full weekend, a full month of weekends, and just discussing Reich's work. What this was on October 17th, 1987, 5 months before we got to England, this part of England had been subjected to a quote-unquote freak storm. I grew up in an area of Long Island where we had hurricanes the end of every summer, usually in late August, early September, and I know what hurricanes are. This was not a hurricane. Many of you have seen photographs of the area in remote Siberia where the famous 1908 Tunguska blast took place, another extremely anomalous incident. And it shows miles and miles and miles of trees that were flattened in an instant because of a explosion in the atmosphere. Nothing actually hit the ground. The damage that we saw in this forest was as though a weapon had been developed to flatten forests, and I'll make my point a little more lucid in a moment. This is some shots taken by a dear friend there, Richie Warnock, of what the forest looked like before October of 1987. It's just a beautiful pine forest, the kind many of us have been through in our lives. The freak storm, quote unquote, came in and did two types of damage. It did massive damage and very curious selected damage. This, for example, it looked like something had come through and like a pie wedge sliced out a whole bunch of trees, but literally chopping them off at about 20 feet. Very, very weird, although it was as though some kind of energy had been directed at that swath of forest and just knocked them all off. And these were good-sized pine trees. I'd estimate that most of them were about 50 feet that we're looking at in this area. Now, the real damage, though, is quite unbelievable. And the best way I have to illustrate it is this. When we were walking out to the site the first day in February of '88, which I've done now many dozens of times over the years, we're walking along a particular stretch of highway, and Larry says, "Stop. Take a picture here in this direction at this angle." I said, "Why?" And he reminded me that when he was first married in 1984, he insisted that his wife come back to this part of England for their honeymoon. Bad decision. She wanted to go to the Bahamas or someplace sensible, and unfortunately that marriage did not last. What she had gotten into, she might as well have married a two-term Vietnam combat veteran. The guy was very damaged at the time. In any case, they had walked out to the area, hadn't gotten fully out there, but on the way, he snapped this picture. And he remembered it, and I dutifully took a shot of what I was seeing right where we were seeing this. Forgive this long setup, but it is necessary because of what you're about to see. There are no tricks, there are no illusions. What happened, again, this is 84, this before and after picture was the equivalent, might as well have been taken 3 hours later, after this storm. Before, after. Before, after. Unbelievable and heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. They estimate more than 1 million trees were brought down in 3 hours. Also remember, hurricanes by definition are water-driven weather fronts. Not a drop of rain fell. And the public was told that the wind had reached a maximum of 95 to 105 miles an hour. That's patent nonsense. It was probably more like 200 miles an hour. It's amazing that there was only, I think, 1, 2, or 3 deaths. Absolutely extraordinary. But some of the things that happened to illustrate the power of the storm we include in our book. Best example I can give you is near where our friends live. So old English houses, a lot of them have slate shingles on the roofs. A shingle was blown off, and you know what a slate shingle looks like. It looks like an axe head. It's flat at one end, it's beveled at the other. This thing blew across the village and went through a window about 100 yards away and stuck in the wall like a tomahawk. Just to give you an idea of some of the storm. Now, it wasn't just me. This is the forest 5 months after the fact. If this doesn't break your heart, I don't know what would. All I could think about was the hair on somebody's head that was undergoing chemotherapy. It was vaporized, and we will never see this forest again in our lifetime. Now, I think this sign says it all. But as I researched this aspect of it, because I knew, why bring this up? I felt that a weather modification device had been used as a weapon, and that it was very likely based on a device that Dr. Wilhelm Reich had developed in the early mid-1950s, which he called a cloudbuster, which was just the opposite in its intentions. An extraordinarily wonderful device that was made to break up stagnant air masses and open them up for moisture-rich air to come in and create rain and break droughts, and it works. Now, I went into the archives of a number of local newspapers in England to see if that photograph that I showed you was an exaggeration. This is in Jersey. And again, this thing, not our Jersey, their Jersey, this storm entered right at the area of the UFO activity and then cut a lateral swath right up Great Britain and ended up in North Wales. So it really took out quite a lot of real estate, but specifically trees. Now, those are big, venerable trees with impressive root systems. Before, after. Before, after. Not nice. This is another forest a little further north, entirely flattened. Another forested area entirely flattened in 3 short hours, no rain. You tell me a hurricane's going to do that? I'm sorry. I don't believe it. This photograph right here is a meteorological satellite photograph taken the day before, on October 16th, 1987. The center, because you can see the spinning, so to say, the center is just north of London, which is where our story takes place. This is a cloudbuster. It is a device that is so deceptively simple that most intelligent people who have heard reference to it dismiss it because it couldn't possibly work. Because it couldn't. It doesn't plug into anything. It's not some big fancy high-tech digital kind of device. It's very analog, so to say. What it is very simple in terms of its construction and its principle. The principle I can best describe to you from a folk remedy that was passed to me by my Russian grandmother and that many ethnic traditions have the equivalent of. When you'd get a boil or a pimple or something, her way of dealing with it was not medication. She'd cut a potato in half and you'd hold it to your face. And what would happen would be you'd experience the cooling of the potato, but it would literally draw out the toxins and either bring it to a head quicker or reduce the swelling. When you pack a bee sting with mud, it doesn't just cool it, as many of us know. The earth, the wet earth itself, draws the bee toxin out of your system. Does everybody get this principle? Because it's crucially important. Drawing. It is a basic function of nature. Now, Reich discovered in the early 1950s, if he took steel pipes, empty steel pipes, and attached to the back of them empty industrial BX cable. Everybody knows what BX is. It runs through our house. It's, kind of got that steel wrapping on it, and it's got wires in it. Industrial BX is much bigger. And if you pull the wires out and you set up a simple apparatus, looks a little like an anti-aircraft gun, The ones that I've been around are usually trailer mounted, and they're about as big as anti-aircraft guns, and drop the cables into either moving water or a well, deep water. The well, the water itself, acts not just as grounding, but it sets up the draw. And what happens, and I can only explain it as simply as I understand it, is it begins to create movement in the atmosphere. And not just movement, it begins to pull down and harmlessly ground dead, stagnant, moisture-starved atmosphere, and creates a movement and an openness that with a trained practitioner of this device, taking into consideration the drifts of air current across the country, you can create an entirely different weather front than the one that you were faced with. A brilliant device. That's Dr. Richard Blasband operating Cloudbuster, actually not that far from here. This picture is probably taken about 20 years ago. I'm guessing about 10 miles from Princeton, New Jersey, near a farmer's pond where they were conducting a demonstration of the device for a number of the students of the subject like myself. And I will tell you this, with God as my witness, I had read about this for years, I accepted the principles that it runs on, but we all know that feeling when the intellect jumps to the experiential. You understand something, in quotes, you accept it in principle, but all of a sudden you're faced with how real it is, and everything changes. Well, our practitioner, and these things put off a certain amount of toxicity when they're working, so you don't stand right next to them. He was working on kind of a remote control about 50 feet away from the truck, and we were all on a hillside in rural New Jersey, maybe a dozen of us, and John said, right, you see that bank of cumulus clouds there? We're going to cut that in half. Now, bearing in mind that the draw comes from the tips of the pipe, I actually saw, whether it was 8 or 16 pipes, 8 and 8, we actually saw those rough 8 holes appear in those clouds. And within 30 seconds, 60 seconds, we had 2 clouds. And then he evaporated the cloud. Then, over the course of 20 minutes, he took the cloud bank that was, say, to the southeast and moved it to the northwest. Extremely dramatic, overwhelming proof that this principle works in earnest. And as you will learn if you study left at East Gate or want to look in this further, there are several remarkably responsible, dedicated practitioners of this technology who receive no recognition, who have continued to break droughts around the world very quietly, being paid by governments such as France, Israel, a number of the African republics. And when my friend Jim DeMeo, who works out of Ashland, Oregon, travels to these countries and works doing weather modification, he actually has to sign statements saying they will not publicly promote the fact that this government hired him to use this technology to break a drought. Because even though it works, it's like UFOs. It's got the same embarrassment factor tied into it. Also, in a way, it's good. If everybody and their brother built one of these things, all holy hell would break loose in the atmosphere. They're not hard to build. They are hard to use responsibly and practically. And a real break in my work on Left at East Gate came just a few days before. This one's in Oregon, by the way. Larry and I headed for England to the first time. He was going through a book of mine on Reich. And he said, is this what you call a cloudbuster? Pointing to a photo, something like that. And I said, yeah. He said, well, we had one of these on base, except it was huge. And it was painted, olive drab, and it was kept by the runway. And I flipped out. I thought he was pulling my leg. And the last thing I needed was to bring this body of work into an already problematical case. But indeed, we found another witness who remembered that apparatus being parked there. And I challenged him and said, you need a well to operate it. He took me on a walk around the base where we saw no less than 15 wells, each one with a lip of maybe 3 feet, perfect for throwing industrial BX over. They're real, they work, the Air Force has them. They're real. Okay, we're going to go back to our lights. Okay, now at this point in an ideal world, I would begin a several-hour talk on Wilhelm Reich and his work. I will not do that because I have 9 minutes left. What I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about Reich and hope you invite me back in a couple of months and I will do a real talk on him. The cloud-busting technology revolves around a common functioning principle in Reich's life work, which was about the study of how energy functions in the living and non-living realm. A nutshell biography. Wilhelm Reich was born in 1897 in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father was a civil servant, fairly well-to-do. He was brought up on a farm, observing all sorts of natural functions, besides crops growing, animals mating, the seasons changing. He and his brother were privately educated by tutors. 1914 rolls around. He is a young man of about 18 or 19. World War I is declared. He joins the Austrian army. He quickly rises to officer status as an artillery gunner, distinguishes himself in combat. Of course, the Austrians are defeated, and he returns home to find that all of the family lands have been confiscated. Also, a very troubling event in childhood that weighed tremendously on his later studies of human psychology is that his mother, who was by all accounts a lovely woman who doted on her two sons, and also a trained pianist who tried to bring them into the world of the arts, married to a very bureaucratic Prussian-type character, obviously not much of a love life, had an affair with Reich's piano teacher. And the young boy, being very confused as any youngster would, realizing this, told his father. His father confronted the mother. The mother was horrified, took her life. The father took his life shortly after by standing out in the rain and getting pneumonia and dying. So he had a certain amount of tragedy under his belt by the time he was a man in his early 20s. He was brilliant, and he entered medical school on a scholarship, worked his way through by being a tutor, and ultimately in the early 20s heard about a gentleman practicing in Vienna named Sigmund Freud. Now at the time, psychoanalysis was in its infancy, and there was no school to study at. If you were bright, if you were interested, you presented yourself to Freud. If you were accepted by the seminar, you basically studied what they were doing, and they started to give you patients, and you were a psychoanalyst. And so Reich's career in psychoanalysis began. He worked as Freud's first assistant from that point until 1929, when he went to Freud after working with several hundred patients. Now, if you have any background in Freudian studies, this is a man who certainly changed our world. I don't know if always for the good, but his contributions to science are certainly recognized. If you go back to Freud's early work, before he was Freud and famous, and still a very courageous young theorist, he theorized that the energy involved in the libido, involved in what animated living things, could be calibrated and measured in a laboratory situation. Even more, that people who had, to keep it as general as I can, healthy sex lives were much freer of neuroses than those that didn't. Simple fact. However, by the time he became Freud, other theories had influenced him, and he felt that certain human neuroses certainly had sexual bases, but not all of them. Reich, in 1929, went to him and said, "Dr. Freud, I must disagree with you on your basic premise. I have found in the several hundred people that I have worked with, most of whom were working class German and Austrian and Russian, that literally every neurosis, no matter how upfused by the workplace or social situations, literally every neurosis had a sexual basis to it. Freud, who was already in a rather sad, repressed marriage himself, who could not face his own problems, so to say, rejected this. They went their own ways." And I'm going to have to move very fast here. The Russian Revolution was only at this point a few years old, and the Soviets had not become hardcore Stalinists, yet there was still room for a certain amount of idealism. And Reich volunteered to open clinics around the Soviet Union to work with workers who had problems and see if he could help them. As he began to work with couples, most of them again very blue collar, one after another, the problems establish themselves as having a basis in sexual stasis or a lack of sexual activity. As they were able to restore some kind of meaningful sexual equilibrium, not only did these people feel better about their lives, function on a higher level at work, but horror of horrors, began to question scientific socialism and communism. What was happening was that they were being governed by their basic bioenergetics, by their love for their mate, by what Reich called work democracy. You want to raise healthy children if you're happy. You want to work because you get satisfaction from it. Now, had this been allowed to spread, it could have created chaos for the communists. They promptly declared him insane and threw him out of the country. He goes back to Austria to practice his therapy and observes at this point, we're within months of Hitler consolidating power in 1933 in Germany, and the repression that is rampant on the streets in Vienna is as bad as it is in Berlin. What he is seeing out of his window of his office is police officers cracking down on innocent civilians in demonstrations, as cops sometimes do, and I like cops, but what horrified him and fascinated him was in truly observing these demonstrations of police officers wading into unarmed groups, holding peaceful vigils, and beating the living hell out of these people, was the total dispassionate nature on the face of the aggressors. The basic look on the face of the cops who were beating the hell out of these innocent people was this. What is going on here, he thought. And he began to look into the pathology that creates that kind of shut-down emotional system. This got him into the beginning of what we would call body work, and a very radical theory that now underpins a tremendous amount of what we would now call New Age physical practitioning, whether it's Rolfing or other kinds of alternate massage. Reich was the godfather of it all. And what he found, and what is a fact, is that memories, especially traumatic memories, are stored in the human body, yes, in our brains, but in muscular contractions that become chronic. You suffer a terrible loss at a vulnerable point in your life. Part of you shuts down a little bit. You may breathe more shallow. You take in less oxygen. You become more resigned. You say to yourself, oh, well, who's ever really happy? I guess I have to settle. And hence begins the death of the organism 40 years before you stop breathing. Shattering. And when he would work on people in the right way, in the right muscular area, where those memories were held in a therapeutic situation, something that may have happened 30 years ago, would come out in therapy, the person would start to sob, they would re-experience the memories that they had been repressing for decades in tremendous detail, and begin to realize that that is what was holding them back all that time in their life, creating behaviors that were anathema to them, and if they could correct it and understand it, they could move through it. Hence the origins of this pioneering type of therapy. But crucial to it is how energy functions in the human body. And when I come back again, I'm going to talk about how that same principle of freeing up the energy applies to the life of an amoeba, or the formation of a star system, or a hurricane. Reich died in prison in, not Harrisburg, it was a prison in Pennsylvania in 1957 on a technical violation because one of his physicians had shipped an accumulator, a device he developed to help break up these contractions, interstate, and he took responsibility. And 10 days before his release date, he was found dead in his cell. I think if we don't destroy ourselves in the next few hundred years, in the Western tradition, the work of Wilhelm Reich will be seen as some of the most important scientific contributions ever made anywhere, and we will all benefit from them, or certainly our children and grandchildren will. Thank you for your attention. Now, as Bob mentioned, I have to head out in a little while. I'm going to take about 15 minutes worth of questions and answers, or did I use them up already? No, I didn't.
Excuse me, Question and answers.
Some of you may want to take a break. I'm here for questions and answers.
So, okay, and then you can take a 5 minute.
Right, and I still have a few books and
Before we bring up
CDs,
the,
which will
other
hopefully,
speakers,
don't make
okay?
me bring them back to New York, folks.
Great, right?
I'd like to know about the book and all, but I'd like to know what happened with the forest. I mean, it was 200 miles, but why? Why did they destroy it?
I can only theorize. I think the reason that they took the forest out was either it was a terrible accident based on them doing an experiment with a device that they had no idea how powerful it was, or in that way that the military mind sometimes work, let's see if we can flatten 8 square miles of forest. If we could do that, wouldn't that be cool? We've got a whole new weapon here to help destroy economies. Bastards, absolute bastards. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you bet.
What was you said the machine that Wright developed it. What was that?
The Cloudbuster?
For the
Right. It's called now, Reich, like many scientists, pioneering scientists, had to develop his own vocabulary. And he called his science of the study of energy orgonomy, based on the word organism. The machine is deceptively simple. It's called an orgone energy accumulator, and it's made out of alternating layers of organic and inorganic material. It looks like it can be made to be this big for germinating plants or big enough for a person to sit in. It's essentially as simple as the fact that it's alternating layers of wood and steel wool. And there is something about this combination that focuses energy. And one of the things that's remarkable is that a small version of this device, if it's placed over an area where, say, you've just skinned your knee or gotten a kitchen burn, it can create new skin within about 4 hours. Yes.
Is that the one that you grow your arm? Is that, they claim they have one where you can grow your arm?
No, nothing like that. It's used by anybody who wants to build one. It's used by a number of practitioners. For example, if you were to go to visit the American College of Orgonomy in Princeton, New Jersey, they use them there. I had a tape I wasn't able to show. I will show when I come back. It's a tape of Reich's daughter, who's now probably about 80 or so, who is a general practitioner in rural Maine who has used these devices for decades to help cure and help healthy skin growth. No, it works. It can energize any organism, and if you sit in it too long, it will make you feel exhausted. It will zap you. But if you sit in it in the dark, as I have, within a matter of minutes, you will see little spinning lights, honestly. And that's another point. We are living in, although we're told it's the opposite in the Western tradition, in the Native American tradition and many esoteric traditions, we are living in a sea of energy. As children, we all had the experience of walking outside on a lovely summer day, looking at the sky and seeing how live the atmosphere was. It looks like pulsating dots and spinning dots. You tell an adult and they say, oh no, you're imagining things, or the good one is that's dust on your eyelid. Well, that's nonsense. If you go outside on a nice day and relax your eyes and stare at the sky for 30 seconds, the kid in you will once again see these spinning, pulsating bits of energy. They are there, they're real.
So you're saying that this machine, this device,
Concentrates it. That's right.
so who does it in this area? Who has that machine? What factory?
Well, the thing is, anybody can make one, and you can get information on making them. I have a listing of sources to get information on these devices, making them yourself, connecting with people who are using them in the back of Left at Eastgate.
Anything to do with electrical voltage?
No, there is no electricity involved, which is one of the reasons that it was declared a crackpot invention.
Where did you say that organization is in New Jersey?
Princeton, American College of Orgonomy, 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 and they have an address in Princeton, a phone number. They are accessible. You can visit them.
Orgonomy.
Yeah, it's the name of the science that refers to the study of energy in the living.
Is it ORGOM?
N as in Nancy, Orgonomy. Yeah.
I read Wilhelm Reich. he talked about the cloudbusters being a way to cause a UFO to lose its energy.
And I never even got to that
Did
point.
did we force that UFO down in Landestein?
That I can't say.
Is that your hypothesis?
It may be true. I never found anything to substantiate it, but Reich himself engaged UFOs over Maine and Arizona, and it's documented and multiply witnessed in his writings. That material is accessible, and records were kept in the most scrupulous way.
I wonder why you were tying the hypothesis between the landing and the Reich altogether.
Well, again, the only connection I can substantiate is that we have multiple witnesses who saw what they describe, in my mind, as a huge scaled-up cloudbuster on that base in 1980 and 1979, and then that weird forest damage. I should also say about that forest damage, the British Meteorological Service, in 167 odd years of record keeping, had never missed a storm coming in, and they missed the biggest storm of all time coming in. Plus, again, you know what it takes to knock down a tree. A hurricane can do it, but a hurricane does not knock down forests. So we're stuck with an anomaly on top of a problem. And as far as solutions and resolution goes, the best I've been able to do in terms of what we've discussed here is sometimes you don't have the answers, but you fight the good fight. And therein lies a useful life and some feeling of accomplishment, as well as trying to get to the truth. I'm pleased to say that a follow-up book to our book was published last month in the United Kingdom and also discusses my writing about it, and they substantiate it with other sources. There is no question that a number of first world military organizations have longed for a weather weapon and done tests. Imagine if you could create hurricanes and cyclones and tornadoes over, your enemy's country. You could destroy them without firing a shot.
Nikola Tesla, and William Wright, do you feel their work parallel each other in some way?
Only in that they were both absolutely authentic, gilt-edged geniuses. Only in that they were both very secretive about certain aspects of their discoveries, in that their body of real established work, remarkable as it is, has been spun out of control in the goofiest ways by a lot of people with very little information, and they've been made into kind of mystified cult heroes when they were giants of science, at the least, if there was more. But I don't know if there's any direct connection between the work of...
Accounts that Nikola Tesla had some sort of a device on a tower on Long Island
Yes.
in the early 1900s.
Yes, it was burned down mysteriously in 1913. It would have, had it worked, it would have created wireless energy, which Westinghouse, being his backer, was horrified by.
Say it's gonna be you.
Well, that'd be wonderful. Imagine if they can't meter electricity.
But I'd be terrible.
Okay, I just want to get some new questions.
Is there any source that we can go in contact with on that, or any book or encyclopedia that has all the works of it?
Absolutely. I give listings of them in the back of my book, but I can tell you right now, if you're on the internet, you can go to a site called obrl.com, Orgone Biophysical Research Laboratory. They're in Maine. They're in Oregon. And you also have here on the East Coast in Princeton, the American College of Orgonomy. If you visit my website, ufocity.com, email me, I'll get you all the information.
UFOcity.com.
Yep.
I'll let you know that I was.
Got it in the link section.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I don't know if there's a link to the ACO, the American College of Orgonomy in Princeton, but there is a link directly to the research laboratory in Oregon, and I think that's the best place to go for more information about cloud busting, backed up by real scholarship and scrupulously kept records of their weather modification work.
I was wondering, how is Officer Warren? Is he all right now?
Larry's doing pretty well. I'm pleased to say that he remarried in this spring, a British woman. He now is a resident of Liverpool. I spoke to him 2 days ago. He asked me to send his best wishes to everybody. He's going to be a dad in about 6 weeks. He still has problems, but he's doing a lot better.
He's a miracle.
He is. He's a tough character and very much to be respected for it.
For his efforts.
I will. That's a promise. Sir.
regarding that freak windstorm and the trees being knocked down, has anyone looked at the trajectory of approach or departure of that energy that landed in the field in December 1980?
Uh,
And were they coming back to tell us something or show us something?
That's what I was.
Not really. No, that has not been developed. I mean, we know that the light itself came from the direction of the North Sea and came in over that field. We know that the storm itself originated in pretty much the same area off the coast of England in the North Sea and came ashore right at that point. Again, those military bases are only 5-6 miles inland. So you can draw your own conclusions. Again, I always have to back off on speculation. We have so much real knowledge, and it's so tempting to take it one step further. I begin and end this book like a legal brief, and I'm very clear to separate what I know, what I think, what I believe, and what I deduce into separate areas. Any other questions?
What's the title of the new book?
Oh, the new book in England is called You Can't Tell the People, and the author is named Georgina Bruni. And she disagrees with us on certain things, and so be it. I think she has made a contribution, and Larry and I are addressing the contradictions. He directly doing talks around England, and me here. But it's certainly worth reading, and it's a big fat book also.
How much is your book?
I'm delighted to say that I've been able to mark them down. The paper-covered one is $10, hardcover is $15, and we have CD-ROM versions of the book that work with any computer that I'm selling for just $5 today.
Oh.
So that's it. And what I'm going to do now is head back to that table. I do indeed.
It's also neat because it has a lot of people on location, as well as color photographs. Hey there. Yes, I'll be right over. No, Carl. Good. Yes. Oh, okay. Next room. Okay.
Okay, that's yours.
You don't want to go on, do you?
Ah. He's great, wasn't he? Wasn't he great?
Thank you, Nick. Much appreciated.
You're gonna get
Let's give Peter a big clap.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
bet.
Thank you. Great. You know, he was at our he was at our first conference, and he helped us out there.
go get it.
So thank you very much, and